See, I was born there in 1903, and I had a sister. She was about 8 years older than I, and to me she was a pain in the neck because she always was ordering me around, and which I guess probably was all right. We had a garden at home. I was about 5 years old. I was scared to death. We had a garden. My father was working away. Darn crows kept pulling up the stuff. And he had an old double-barreled 10-gauge shotgun. And they're pretty big and heavy, you know. And this garden was near our barnyard where we let the cattle out to get water in the barn, from the barn. And so these crows kept getting on the garden, pulling stuff up. And everybody else was gone away except me and my mother there, and these crows out there, and she went out with this old double-barrel 10-gauge shotgun. She got out there inside the yard by the wall and put the gun over the wall and sighted on the crows, cocked both barrels and pulled both barrels. And that gun was a dangerous place, was behind it, not in front of it. And that kicked, hit her right in the chin, and cut her chin right open. Well, she come in the house, and like I say, I was pretty young. I was scared. And she went in where the sewing machine was, and she got a needle and thread. She come out and stood by the little mirror on the wall in the kitchen. Started to sew that up. Well, I was scared. I was howling my head off, running around there, and I can remember this. She turned around and she said, "Shut up! I want to get this sewed up before it comes to his feeling." Sewed that up, needle and thread. Yeah. My great-great-grandmother on my mother's side was a full-blooded Indian squaw. And I remember when I got old enough, so I used to go with my father up in northern Maine woods in the fall deer hunting. I started taking compass with me. You know, I never took it, only once or twice. I couldn't understand the thing, didn't mean nothing to me. I didn't need a compass. And as years went on, I wondered about that. And you know, it dawned on me that it must have something to do with that Indian blood. I'd go out in the woods up there on an overcast day and wander around for 2-3 hours, got ready to go back to camp. Never bothered me about the direction to go back to camp. I just turned around and went right back to camp without thinking about it. It apparently is an instinct that the Indians had that modern man doesn't have. And some of that wore off on me, I guess, and I never got lost in the woods and never took a compass up there. I couldn't understand the compass. They didn't mean nothing to me. They only told you where north and south was, and I wanted to know where the camp was. I didn't care about north-south. Mother was, of course, an awful hard-working woman, and she was a great person to take over if my father was sick. I remember my sister, see, I only, children of us, there was only 2, and my sister was 8 years older than I was, and to me she was a pain in the neck, you know, because she wanted to order me around. And at one time, the measles disease went through here in the fall. And my sister got it, and I got him, my father got him, and he was terribly sick. So my mother had to take care of everything. She had to take care of the cattle, do the milking, and all the work that he normally would do. He was sick of bed much as week 10 days. And I wasn't old enough to do anything. I was about 5 years old. My sister was 8 years older than I was, but she was away to school most of the time. And those were the good old days. I never cared for farming much. Although one fall I went up to Roostick on the picking potatoes up in Bridgewater, Maine, for Robbie Kingsbury, and otherwise than that, I never could see going into a factory and sitting by a machine for 20 years. It didn't appeal to me. I did become a textile worker and weaving. I worked in the Sanford mills quite a bit, and I made plush. That's when your automobile was all upholstered in plush. And I worked in the Sanford mills winters, 2-3 winters, and no, I didn't care for doing any one thing for a long period of time. I couldn't probably remember all the different companies and things that I worked at. I worked for the H.L. Frost Insecticide Company in Allerton, Massachusetts. That's climbing trees and trimming trees for the millionaires. And then I worked for the Mullane Tree Expert Company in Middletown, Connecticut. Worked down New York City in the parks. In fact, I put a cavity into a big elm tree in the butt of a big elm tree in Central Park. And it was quite amusing because a rural New Yorker, he doesn't know, he may know a lot about his work and New York City, but he doesn't know anything about anything else. And I had a man there one day come along and stand there for half or 3/4 of an hour watching me chiseling into that tree to get it ready to fill it with filling. And then he very politely walked up to me and said, "What are you doing?" After standing there about an hour and watching me, I thought that was really something. I joined a circus once, but I didn't stay with them. I left them. Something told me I'd better. But of course, I worked around this area as I got grown up, and I did repair work, buildings outside, more carpenter work and roofs especially. I like to be up in the air, climbing around. And when you're up on the roof of a tall building, nobody's going to drop anything on you. Well, I've been up and down the narrow gauge railroad, yeah. If you were tired, it was a little easier than walking, but you're not much faster. It was kind of slow. Of course, that was when I was quite young that went. And really it wasn't much of a railroad. But it carried a lot of students from up through this area down to West Caston to go to high school. It was a big asset that way. But I rode on it 2-3 times, but I didn't have much occasion to ride on it. You see, if you didn't have a car and you was going to Gardner, it was better to walk to Gardner than it was to take that train, go to West Casset, and wait, and then circle around Brunswick and go up to Gardner on the train. Take you about all day that way. Walk from here to Gardner in 2 hours, so it was no great advantage. Of course, it carried a lot of, back in wartime, First World War, there was a big shortage of hay in Boston, and of course they had a lot of horse teams. And I know a fella came down from Boston and stayed at our place for a week or more. He went all around through here buying hay. And then he hired my father to get a hay press and press it up, and that was all shipped down in Narragansett, so into Boston. That's, of course, they didn't have the trucks then, you know, like they have today. It was more horse teams, and they needed hay. I know we pressed one over across the river here. One place, hay'd been in the barn, they'd been cutting it to a little small field. Year after year and putting it in the barn, they had the barn for a hen house. And the hay was full of rotten eggs and everything. You pushed it right up and it went into Boston just the same. I don't know. You know, we have a lot of people, business people in this country that ain't so nice, really. Yeah. And
could you tell us a little bit about your cure for tuberculosis?
well, there is something. There is something that is a very important thing. Nobody is interested. And for a year or two, I tried pretty hard to get somebody interested. Well, the people that was in a position to do something about that, the one principal thing they wanted to know, what is it? Well, of course they wanted to know that. But you know, if I had told them, probably 50% of them wouldn't have believed me anyway and would have walked off. Forgot it. The other 50% might have tried it and found out it worked. And they would probably have a castle in Spain or somewhere today with the money they made out of it. I wouldn't have a bit bigger bank account. So to heck with that. And I eventually kind of left it all alone, did the heck with it, let them die, see if I care. I'll take care of relatives or friends or people I know. The rest of them can die. And that's the way it's been ever since, and they have died when they didn't need to. You give me a TB patient. Now, I ain't saying that this would work if he's gone downhill to the extent the doctor says he's got no more than a week to live. I wouldn't guarantee a thing. But I can treat him, and I'll only have to treat him once. And that'll be the end of his TB. You see, when this planet was created, I maintain that upon this planet there was put a cure for every ailment or disease of man or beast. But they didn't leave a book telling which was which. That was up to us to find out. And I've cured people. I have given this to people, and they afterwards would let me know and hunt me up. I'm all right. And I haven't for years tried to do anything with any societies or doctors or anything else, because I put in about 2 years of going place to place. Nobody's interested. And I can understand why. Why would they think the possibility that a person untrained in that field would know anything about it? Naturally, they would assume that I would know anything about it. Well, I didn't. I'd been told.
Who told you?
Well, I was up in a rooster picking up potatoes. That was in the fall of somewhere back around 25, 27, and in Bridgewater, Maine. And I went up with a fellow that's now since deceased that I knew. He was a little younger than I, lived over here in Pittston, English boy. He'd been up there before. And he got this job back again for that particular year. And the fellow's name that owned the property where we was going was Kingsbury, Robert Kingsbury. I had this boy a great deal so that he could pay him some money. And this boy was taken sick with TB. They, of course, didn't have the money to send him away to be taken care of, and he had to stay at home, and the local doctor did the best he could do, but he couldn't do much. And Mr. Kingsbury would hire him as much as he could, if he could find something for him to do, because Mr. Kingsbury was not exactly a poor person. And he told me that he had the boy working for him. It was in the spring of the year. And he sent the boy onto a ridge in the field to pick up any rocks he could find of any size and lug them down and throw them in a swamp hole. And because he was plowing his fields all this spring. And he told me, he said, I circling around and I saw the boy sitting down up on the ridge. I knew he wasn't feeling good. So he said, I didn't pay any more attention. The next trip around, he said he'd gone, and I thought he went home. So he said, I worked the rest of the afternoon plowing there, and I went down to the barn. It got dark, put in the horses up. And the boy come in the barn, and he said, Mr. Kingsbury, I didn't work this afternoon. Didn't feel good. And Mr. Kingsbury told me, he said, I told him that was all right, because he said wages were cheap, didn't pay him much, I'd pay him anyway. And I can see Mr. Kingsbury now. He said, the boy told me, no, I know some stuff that grew down there in your swamp. I went down, I filled up on it the whole afternoon. Robbie Kingsbury leaned forward and threw his hand right at me. Charlie, that boy never had any more TB. Well, now, Mr. Kingsbury, I believed him. He was a man that didn't tell you these things unless he knew it for a fact. So I come down home, I kept thinking about it. And without telling anybody what it was, I tried 2, 3 doctors. I went up to Augusta, the State House. I had 3 women from different departments for much as 2 hours talking with them. One of them believed me. I could see that very easily. They didn't believe me. Well, why should they? I wasn't supposed to know about these things. Well, over the years, I had 2 or 3 cases. I had a fella down in Damascotta Mills. He worked when I worked in the shipyard in Bath. He was a burner. You get a lot of fumes when you're a burner. And I come out of my door, and he come out of his, a little ways from me there one evening. And I hollered to him, and I said, Ken, how you doing? We was working the shipyard 7 days a week. Well, he said, not very well. So I went over, or part way over, and he come over and talked with him. Well, I said, what's the matter? He said, I don't know. He said, I don't feel good. He said, all the time, I don't feel good, and I'm beginning to cough quite a bit, and he said, I don't know. Well, I said, why don't you go to the doctors? Oh, Lord, he said, I've been to doctors. They examined me, and they think I am developing spots on my lungs for TB. Well, I said, why don't you do something about it? Oh, he said, I take medicine all the time, don't do any good. Well, I said, Ken, what are you doing next Sunday? Nothing. I didn't have a car because I was riding with another fellow. Well, I said, Ken, you take your car and I'll tell you where to go. I'll get you some stuff. Now, it won't hurt you any, but I ain't telling you it's going to do you any good either. Because I don't know. All right? So the next Sunday he took me, and I told him we went out back town. And I got him some of the stuff in the spoon. Probably about a third of a spoonful. And I'll never forget. I handed it to him and I said, here, you want to take this right off. You don't want to let it sit around. He took it right in the mouth and he swallowed it. Whoa, he said. He never had any more trouble. He's alive today, married, and he lives down in Georgia, I think.
Just that one cure? That did
Just
it?
that once, that's right. Yep. Then I had a little Pekingese dog here. And the little Pekingese dog got the coughing. He'd wander around in that trailer, cough, 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 cough. And it kept getting worse. I got my wife at that time to take her car, and I took the dog in my lap, went down the hall. I knew about where to go where I could get some of this right alongside the road. I got a little bit in a teaspoon, probably 2 or 3 drops. Well, you probably know dogs like that, they don't like to take medicine. And so I attempted to give this to the dog, and he didn't want, anything of that kind. And the minute he got a little bit of that in his mouth and swallowed it, oh boy, didn't he beg for more, more, more. That was the end of his cough. Now, I don't know any more than that. You figure it out. A child is born. The mother and father is not mentally reduced because of the child's birth, is she? No, she's not one. Now, your experts may say one thing and some may say another because they ain't sure. But in the human being, you have, well, I have to call it the spirit. It is what enables us to know, to think, to learn. And those spirits in the human being, if you've never thought about this, when a child is born, where do they come from? The man and woman create the flesh, blood, and bones with all the organs within it necessary to sustain life. Now, the head contains a brain, but the mother and father does not produce the faculties for that child to learn and understand. That is developed by the development of the brain and that power of knowledge. And that's why if there's something wrong with the brain and it isn't normal, the child may be what you call an imbecile. all alive, all healthy, but it doesn't have a brain that's perfect. A spirit enters his body, either at birth or directly afterwards. And that spirit that a child like that has is the spirit of a no-good Al Capone that enters his body. He'll always be that way. He'll never be anything else because he can't resist it. And that's why a guy is born from a family of laborers, maybe slave laborers. And as he gets up in the teens, he always admired music. So he gets somewhere where somebody has a trumpet. I saw a guy do this, see? And that kid said, "Let me take that. I'd like to try one of them. Always wanted to. And a slide trombone, and they're not an easy instrument to play." He took it and he got a note or two on it, started right in playing a piece. Never seen a slide trombone before in his life. About 12 years old. I saw that. How could he do that? I can't. But this was, without a question, this was all a big lake, and your outflow of it was right across here in the hollow. And it went that way, and it went down through and went into the Eastern River. At this side of the Eastern River, you have what they call the canyon. It goes down between the edges of the hills there, and one area of that is probably 50 foot in height, pretty near sheer height. And at the top there is a cave. And I went in there with the help of my neighbor across the street and another fellow used to be with me, and I had climbing lines that I had previously used when I worked on the trees. And if I hadn't had the lines on with their help, I couldn't have gone in and come out. I went in about 40 feet. I went in beyond where the animals was in the habit of going. And you could drop a pebble down and it would go I estimated 40 to 60 feet down before it hit. And at the top of that, which was probably 40 feet above brook level, you had two columns, circular columns in the cave, which in my opinion had to be made by the rush of water going through, leaving these two columns. And they always called it the coon hole because trappers used to trap coon at the mouth of it. And it's a very interesting spot. I didn't come up onto that idea until about a year or two ago. And finding that mound helped to bring the things in focus, and so that I realized that this was a lake. You see, that mound and those people that lived here in that period, they had to depend upon the land for their food. And when the glacier broke the bank down and this lake was drained, it left that all barren land. And therefore, there was a lot of food, shellfish. And that gave them a big supply of food, and they would have gathered here from all around and stayed here quite a number of years, and that's, they apparently buried their deceased in mounds. They were known, as you probably know, the mound people. And I went all over it the first time I discovered it. Up and down the sides, everywhere. Now, in this area, in this country, with our fall and winters, it is customary for a slope over the years to have water collect and run down, make a little depression. There weren't any on this. And that's what aroused my curiosity. I went all over it, and I came up here 3-4 times going over it. And, oh, it probably was 6 or 8 years after that, I had a National Geographic. And in the Geographic, it showed pictures, and there was a big article about how they had excavated, I think down in the Carolinas, the small mounds of the mound people. Quite an article there. I read the whole of it. And then it dawned on me, I thought, gee, Craniers, that's a mound of the mound people right up there. And, of course, as I grew up, and this was all cleared, I used to run around with a group of young fellas, Kings Mills way, Harold Jewett, Sonny Bronze, Curtis Coombs, those people. Half of them are more dead now. And I always wanted to get them to come up here without anybody knowing. We'd take shovels, dig in here, remove one of them logs, and then in the dead of night, carry it right down the middle of King's Mills, down the squares, go across the bridge, and set it on a stand, and open it up. And if I could have got them to help me, that's what I would have done. Boy, I would have scared the whole population everywhere. But they wasn't too enthused over it. But I figured that would be a good way to let them know what was up here. Well, I am not a rich person, but I would bet everything I have, property and everything else, I'm right. If somebody wants to take me up with equal value. Yes, sir. And all you got to do is get 3-4 rugged fellows with shovels and dig in. And I'll bet you that what they find, they'll drop their shovels and run. But if I could have got them fellows to do it, we would have dug in here and removed one of them and set it up right at the entrance of the bridge there in Kings Mills Village. It's in the middle of the night, some night, taking the cover off, going home, going to bed. That's what we should have done. Boy, I'm telling you, I always had that desire to dig one of them out, put it right down there in the square at Kings Mills Village, middle of the night some night, and go home, go to bed. Let the public come up around and wonder what that is and go and look in. We should have done it. Sure. That's the real. You cut that down and cut the rings, and I bet you got 150 of them.